Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening's live Creative Contessa Cruise question and answer session. A lot of you said you couldn't actually be here at this time slot, and that's fine because you sent me questions to answer. So let's go ahead and get this party started. Hopefully the connectivity will be better this time than it was in our last one. We'll see. At any rate, I have my laptop back finally after that horrible ordeal with FedEx. So this has a much better integrated webcam than the laptop that I had to buy in Florence to temporarily replace this one. The fun, the joy. So go ahead and as you're joining in, feel free to ask questions in the comments and I'll try to keep an eye on them and not get lost in my own answer. So for those who may be wondering, I'm in Korea at the moment. I'm actually outside of Seoul, not in Seoul, but somewhere in its vague vicinity, the greater Seoul area. And we actually just came back from a lovely excursion down to a city that has reconstructed its medieval city walls and fortress fortifications and palace. And so we had a lovely day in the afternoon exploring gorgeous historic sites. And we'll eventually be turning that into something fun to watch, probably. Hello, Sweden to Korea. Let's see how international we can get. So as I was saying, as you have questions, just put them in the chat and I will address them. But otherwise, I actually already have a bunch of questions people submitted. So a lot of the questions about cruising these days and travel have to do, unsurprisingly, with COVID. And I'm going to preface this by the COVID situation is developing so quickly that the conditions under which you start a trip are not going to be the same as the conditions probably under which you end a trip. Literally, while we were on this last voyage, which we took from February 20th to March 6th out of Southampton, when we started, we had to have a passenger locator form for the UK, and we had to participate in the track and trace program. And, by the time we got back 2 weeks later, there was no more track and trace. The UK had rolled back every single protective measure you can possibly imagine, and everyone was walking around like it was 2019 when we disembarked. The point is that any answers I give you now will satisfy your curiosity, but won't be useful if you are going on your own trip. So keep your eye, that's my big piece of advice. Keep your eye on the official government websites for your departure and destination countries, and also the airlines, because remember, yes, governments may have a set of rules, but airlines will have their own rules that could be more than the government's regulations. They're businesses and they're allowed to require more safety measures than the government may demand. Cruise lines will also have their own set of safety measures, which will in most cases exceed the government requirements. So a lot of questions I keep getting from people are, well, such and such government is no longer requiring X, Y, or Z. Why is the cruise line still requiring it? Why is the airline still requiring it? Well, because being on a boat for 2 weeks, breathing each other's air intimately day after day after day is not the same as going and seeing a movie for 2 hours. So different safety requirements there. Just like you're not going to fall off the theater while you're watching a movie, but you could fall overboard on the boat. So there's different safety measures in place. So on our voyage, we went from Southampton down to the Canary Islands and we went to Madeira, and then we ended up not going to Lisbon, which we were supposed to do, but Portugal was still requiring a lot of everyone had to be tested on board before disembarking, and that was just too much work. So we went to the Rock of Gibraltar. We went to Gibraltar instead, and that was wonderful. And then we went to Cadiz in Spain, and it rained like I've never seen it rain in Spain. And then we headed back up through the Bay of Biscay to Southampton. So that was our 2 weeks. And while we were on board, masks were still required. That's the big question. Are masks still required? Masks were still required, and as far as I know, they are still required. Now, they were required for people meandering about the ship. They were required if you hypothetically weren't actively eating and drinking, but no one really abided by that. People basically, once they sat in a chair, their masks for the most part came off. And honestly, all the chairs were so close together and the tables were so close together that if there had been a super spreader on board, we all would have ended up getting it. You were supposed to wear masks while dancing on the dance floor. My beloved and I were the only people wearing masks while dancing, which is why some of our pictures maybe don't look so, they look a little intimidating. We sort of look like terrorists out there on the dance floor, and I guess probably some of our fellow dancers probably thought we were as well. So masks are still required, but only in certain conditions, and generally only when moving around, although they were required in the theater as well for theatrical productions, and no drinking or eating was allowed in the theater because of that. So, you know, when you're on a cruise boat, a lot of people actually cruise solo, and they do so because they want to go and meet people. And actually, for those who haven't done a cruise, one of the great things about a voyage like that is the chance to meet people from all over the world and maybe make new friends that you might actually keep for years to come. My mother and stepfather are still very close with a woman who's my age, actually, and her fiance, whom they met her on a cruise 22 years ago almost. So, you know, you can really make good friends that way. But if you're a solo traveler and you're cruising, some people have asked, does that mean you have to sit on your own and dine alone and take tea alone? And no, they're not. Those were the requirements when people first started cruising. Again, back in the late summer and the fall, that was sort of, if you could only socialize and come in close contact with people in your travel bubble. So you actually had to be on the same travel reservation, but that's not the case anymore. People are allowed to, if you request it, you may sit at a table with random strangers. And we did. We were at a table of 7 other people. Was my math bad? My math is bad. Yeah. 5 other people. We were at a table with 5 other people. Yeah. I can do math. We were at a table with 5 other people, and one of them was in fact a single gentleman. Well, he has a lady friend, but she was in Canada and not allowed to leave the country yet. So she couldn't come with him on that particular voyage. And so he requested, of course, to be sat with people, and everyone at the table, we were all in agreement. We were ready to risk a little bit and socialize. So no, if you're a solo traveler cruising, most cruise lines now will allow you to choose to sit with random strangers and make new friends. Then are COVID tests required? Yes. So a lot of cruise lines are still actually requiring COVID tests to embark. And in fact, Cunard, we were cruising on the Queen Elizabeth, MS Queen Elizabeth, a Cunard ship of White Star fame. Cunard actually acquired White Star after all of their failures in the teens. The boats kept sinking and whatnot. So anyway, Cunard's MS Elizabeth, they did require testing, but thankfully they were testing in Southampton at the terminal. So you arrived, your time for arrival was to go and get tested. They did the testing, it didn't cost you anything. And then you had the scariest half hour of your life. Okay, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but it's the scariest half hour of my vacationing life while you waited to see if you popped hot for COVID. Because if your test came back positive, then they told you you'll be denied boarding. Thankfully, if you're denied boarding because of COVID, all your funds are immediately refunded or credited to another voyage if you wish it. So no loss on your part. Thankfully, there's a little flexibility about that, because it used to be oftentimes if you couldn't voyage because of illness, that was on your insurance to pay for, if your insurance covered it. That the cruise lines had no liability for that. So they were testing in the port, but that was because it was Southampton, and that's Cunard's base of operations, so to say. But if you're embarking from other ports, you might have to arrange your own COVID test. I do know that for people embarking from Brooklyn, for instance, New York City, you do have to arrange your own COVID test, at least as of now. Again, situation is constantly in flux, so I'm going to recommend once more, check out the cruise line's website, contact them directly, get words straight from the horse's mouth, and make sure that you are up to date to the latest information. So COVID tests were required for us. We didn't have to pay for them, and they were done right before boarding. And I will tell you that when the lady came and found us, and she didn't look like the Grim Reaper, coming to deliver horrible news. I thought I thought this is joy. This is what pure joy means. They're finally going to let me on this boat after 2.5 years of isolation. So yeah, it was also the most stressful lead up to any vacation I've ever had, because literally for the 5 days leading up to embarking, I kept coming into contact or having people with whom I'd had contact test positive for COVID. And so I was testing myself 3 times a day, every day. I was paying for PCR tests. Then I landed in the UK, and the UK had rolled back every single mask requirement. And so everyone is walking around, like I said, like it's 2019. And I knew someone was going to make me sick. Well, thankfully, I was wrong. I double masked. I stayed away from every other human, and I got on the boat safely. Yay. Okay. If you're just joining, I have a whole bunch of questions that people pre-submitted for inclusion in this Q&A, but do feel free to just submit any questions you have in the chat. You can interrupt me midstream. It's fine. I interrupt myself midstream all the time. Tangents are a thing. Soapbox is hard too. I'll try not to do too much of that. So next question, dress codes on board. So some of you, if you've never cruised before, then you might not be aware that various cruise lines may have dress codes for their voyage, and the dress code may actually be day-by-day specific. Fewer and fewer cruise lines, though, have dress codes, and a lot of them have now moved to country club casual, which is a bunch of nonsense. I mean, I used to belong to a country club. People sat around in their swimsuits at the pool all day. Is that the dress code? It's a nonsense bit of terms. But in any case, Cunard is one of the few cruise lines left to actually have a dress code. But so that would mean that there's 2 levels now. There used to be 3. There are 2 levels now. There's what they call smart casual, which for Americans, the term smart doesn't say much, unfortunately, because smart means dressed sharply, right? But we don't really use smart that way in American English, so a lot of Americans are confused by that. Anyway, smart casual is the base level, and smart casual used to be that after 6 p.m., gentlemen had to wear a jacket and nice slacks, and ladies could wear a cocktail dress or dressy separates, like dressy. The idea was it was still dressy, just not formal. Well, this last voyage, jackets were now optional, and gentlemen were just requested or required to wear a shirt with a collar and slacks on smart casual evenings. And so the level of dressiness on our last voyage on the Queen Elizabeth definitely took a downturn. And I would show you pictures if I were allowed to take pictures of random other people, and I'm obviously not. That's a violation of privacy. But also, YouTube doesn't really allow for screen sharing, apparently, sadly. So I tried showing pictures last time by just doing the most crude thing I can imagine, which is holding my phone up to the screen, and it did not play well. It did not. The refresh rates were completely off. So dress code, much more casual than it was than the before times. We haven't been on a cruise since November of 2019, December 2019. So it's been a long time for us. So we've noticed a bunch of changes. Even on Cunard, the quintessence of formal British glamorous cruise experience, much more casual than it used to be. However, for those of us who really do like dressing for dinner and cruise because we like dressing up because someone else is doing all of the messy work for us. The good news is that I spoke to the entertainment director at the end of our voyage, and she said many guests have complained about the lower dress standards, and so they were looking at going back to what it had been before. So jackets will once more be required for gentlemen, and ladies will be expected to not look like they've just come away from the pool. On formal evenings, those were actually called gala evenings, and on our voyage we only had 3 out of 2 weeks, which is nonsense. That's another change. There used to be 2 gala evenings a week, so every 7 days you had 2 gala evenings. We had 14 days, and we had 7 sea days. So we had plenty of days at sea where people had all the time in the world to relax and then get dolled up in the evening. But they only scheduled 3 gala days, and a lot of people complained about that too, actually. But each of the evenings was hypothetically themed, so I actually will see if this works. So Yay, it's not mirrored. That says black and white for people who aren't looking in their rearview mirror. So this was what we received on our bed for the black and white ball. And it has on the back descriptions of all the activities that were going to be happening in the day. So the theme was reminiscent of its origins from Truman Capote's gathering at the magnificent New York Plaza Hotel in 1966. The iconic black and white celebration will be brought to life once again tomorrow as the atmosphere is heightened across the ship. During the day, master the art of mixology or take your fellow guests on in the quiz. Both have been tailored with a unique black and white flourish to whet your appetite before the evening's festivities begin. Sit back and enjoy one of our black and white feature movies from the comfort of your stateroom, or get ready in style with a selection of gala evening inspired spa and beauty packages. Spend money, please, is what they're saying. As the sun sets, don your finest black and white attire and be dazzled by the eye-catching glamour of this timeless and elegant celebration. Savor the exquisite taste of our signature gala evening menu in the beautiful surrounds of your restaurant. After dinner, try a black and white inspired cocktail. Spend money. And enjoy a host of world-class entertainment, from a spectacular production show to captivating musical performances and more. Please refer to your daily program for full details of our black and white feature events. Interesting that they don't actually mention the black and white ball itself, the dancing in the ballroom, which is one of the signature aspects of the Cunard experience. They have an actual ballroom on their ships. It's why we cruise only with them, because no other ship has a ballroom anymore. Anyway, so that was the black and white evening. And hypothetically, people specifically wore only black and white. And I will say that the ship was decked out in black and white. I don't really remember seeing color anywhere on any person. Really, everyone dove head over heels for the black and white theme. And happily for us, my beloved condottiero, my husband, he has tropical mess dress from the U.S. Army, and that is black and white. And apparently someone actually stopped and asked the entertainment director at one point, seeing us dancing, and asked if he'd gotten his uniform from the ship theaters company's costume stores. Because, ships are known for just letting guests go and ramble through their costumes and use them for formal evenings. Anyway, so the dress code. Even what dress code there was, the other question is it enforced? And it wasn't really enforced. There were a lot of people wearing just like t-shirts and regular pants walking around after 6 o'clock in the main areas of the ship. Again, though, lots of complaints were made that the reason we choose this experience is for the glamorous formality. So they do plan on going back to that, apparently. Let's see. Do the ships feel empty? So for those who haven't been cruising much, you might not be aware of the fact that a lot of ships have been cruising at like 50 or 60% capacity instead of full capacity, or even 75% by now, because of course they were concerned about jamming too many potentially infected bodies into one space. And I'm not certain what the capacity was on ours. It was not full capacity. I think it may have been 75%, but it did not feel empty to me. But we did talk to some guests who were cruising on the earlier voyages, and they said it felt a bit like a ghost ship. But I don't think that's the case anymore. Is dancing allowed? That's an interesting question people have been asking. Yes, dancing is allowed now, and people they're not even enforcing mask wearing. So you can absolutely get out and dance on the floor. Any changes that stand out from the before times to the now times? So there's been a lot of changes. Some I actually think are for the better, some not necessarily so much. And some of these changes are sort of cruise industry wide. So one of the big changes is the buffets. And at first, when cruising came back online, they weren't doing buffets at all because of the risk of contagion, or the perceived risk of contagion. And now they have restored the buffet service, but you do not serve yourself. You don't even get to pick your own plates, because they don't want you putting your potentially grubby little hands on every plate or every fork, knife, and spoon before settling on the one you want. So service staff hands you a plate. And then you go down the line and service staff puts the food on the plate that you indicate. So you no longer get to choose your own portioning. And but it also means, honestly, I prefer it this way because it keeps the buffet so much neater. There's not, guests, when they serve themselves, invariably the food ends up not all on the plate. And so it ends up on the buffet line, and it's a mess to clean up. So I think it's actually cleaner this way. And it actually, I'm pretty certain, is saving the cruise line a lot of food, because when people portion, I mean, I know me, when I portion for myself, my eyes tend to be much bigger than my stomach. And so I end up putting way more food on the plate than I should. Whereas when the staff is serving, they tend to put a more reasonable portion, and they put a little at a time until you tell them to stop. So I think it's probably maybe resulted in fewer pounds gained. So that's a big change. Food service has changed in the buffet area, but otherwise the food in the buffet was just as we remembered it before. So for those who don't know, on Cunard's cruises, in the buffet, they have a theme every evening, and the buffet area is referred to as the Lido deck. And in a lot of cruise lines, it's called the Lido deck. On the Lido restaurant, every evening they have a different theme, and sometimes they try to line the theme up with the port. So if you're in Madeira, then it's going to be local Madeiran specialties, or if you're in Cádiz, it's going to be Andalusian specialties, or if you're in Gibraltar, it will be British food, I guess. And so, but the best evening, if you are on a Cunard cruise, the best buffet evening you must go to, forget the restaurant in this evening, go for their Indian buffet, because the cruise boats employ a good deal of people who are either from India or from colonies of people from India whose native cuisine is Indian curry, and they know how to prepare it right. So the Indian buffet on the Lido deck is not going to have the usual things you order off of the menu in the United States. It's going to have some unique curries and a really good food and a lot of lamb. Other things that have changed that are kind of disappointing. Some of you may have heard of the chocolate buffet. So it used to be that the pastry chefs and the confectioners would go all out one night, one special evening, and they would design the most amazing chocolate desserts, truffles and cakes and pies and chocolate delicacies like you can only dream about, and maybe should only dream about, no one should eat. But they would lay this out gorgeously with these amazing ice sculptures, and it was a big to-do, and it was really beautiful. It was an absolutely Instagrammable moment, as they say these days. But there was no chocolate extravaganza on this voyage. So that was a little sad. Even though we don't really usually eat much from it, it was an event. It was a lot of fun to just go and see what concoctions the pastry chefs had conjured out of their minds. So no more chocolate buffet. For those who are also not aware, typically there are a lot of cocktail parties on these cruises, on the Queens, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary, and Queen Victoria. If you are the captain will host a cocktail party, a big cocktail party in the ballroom, and there'll be one for World Club guests. So those are the frequent, just kind of everyone. And then there'll be some more smaller and smaller ones for higher levels of frequent cruiser status. And then you get to actually glad a hand with the captain. You get to meet the senior executive staff. They'll actually do a breakdown of the nationalities represented on the ship. And that's always really fascinating to hear some of the more exotic countries that can sometimes be represented amongst the passenger base. But since cruising has restarted, there are no more of those cocktail parties. And a lot of people I know used to go to those cocktail parties and take the opportunity to get sloshed for no price, because normally alcohol on a cruise ship is very expensive. But at those parties, there's waiters, white gloved waiters floating around with a variety of alcoholic concoctions. And I know a lot of people used to walk away would be a strong statement from those parties, very happy. No more. Instead, at this time, one of the evenings, basically a note with compliments of the captain was awaiting us at our plate with a glass of bubbly on the captain, as it were, for everyone. So that was the replacement for the cocktail party. Not quite as fun, but it meant there was more time for dancing in the ballroom. So I'm always in favor of that. Other things that have changed For those who cruise with Cunard on the Queen, specifically for the ballroom dance, you're not going to like this next change. There were many evenings in the ballroom where there was not ballroom dancing, and they had non-dancing things altogether happening. And that seemed to have been a trend. And I think enough people have complained that hopefully they might roll it back or reconsider their approach to it. But there were at least 5 evenings where there was no ballroom dancing in the ballroom, and they put the ballroom dancing up in the yacht club, which is this little nightclub on the 12th deck where the most motion from the boat can be felt. So that's great for ballroom dancing. And the floor is tiny, and it was canned music instead of the dance orchestra. Of course, many of us also only cruise with Cunard because they have a dance orchestra, a proper dance orchestra. Like, where do you have that anymore? Hardly anywhere on no other cruise ship, as far as I know. But they weren't leveraging the dance orchestra for dancing. They were using them for a 70s and 80s night, and there was a soul music night. And I have to say, neither of those evenings were very well attended. And then they had a cabaret night where they covered the dance floor and table. So even if they happened to perform danceable music, there was no place to dance. So that's kind of a sad development. And we'll see if it keeps going that way. On our voyage in 2019, we were actually informed that probably ballroom dancing would eventually disappear altogether. However, for those who care, I had a discussion with the entertainment director at the end of this voyage, and she was extremely receptive, very interested in our input, especially because we're much younger than the average cruiser on Cunard. And she was very interested to hear that we only were cruising with them because there was ballroom dancing and we would stop if it stopped. I mean that. I love cruising, but a big part of it is that it means I can go dancing, I can swing, and I can tango, and I can waltz to my heart's content every single evening without having to make extra special plans to do so. So if I don't get to do that anymore, I'll come up with a different kind of vacation, I'll be honest. Anyway, she was very receptive to our input, and she did mention that other people had also complained. And so hopefully they'll keep using the ballroom for its intended purpose. I really do hope. Other questions that we received. That's kind of it. The changes that stand out. Activities. Oh, some people asked about the activities that were available. Right. So we actually saved some of the daily programs. Look, you can't see it because it's backwards and flashy and shiny, but every day, for those who haven't cruised, your room steward, and you'll have a room steward. We had a butler because we had a suite, and if you haven't seen it, you can watch the review we did of our suite on the Queen Elizabeth. But every day, they make a daily program, and at the night, in the evening when they turn down your bed, because you get a turn down service, they place your daily program for the next day on your bed, so you can, before going to bed, decide how you're going to plan your day. And the daily program presents literally a beginning of day to end of day schedule of every single thing happening on the boat. So you can decide what you want to do and how you want to do it. So here's some. I'm not going to read you. I'm not going to read the entire schedule, although someone said they would like to just hear me reading things like schedules. I'm not going to do that, guys. Okay, if you paid me enough, I'll do it. But I do have a price. Anyway, so this is an example of a schedule on a port day. So a port day means your boat docks usually in the morning, and you can leave the boat and go and wander. That's a port day. And this was the schedule for Puerto del Rosario, Fuerteventura, España. It's one of the Canary Islands. Very interesting history of the Canary Islands, by the way. I can recommend a visit. So what that means is that generally people are going to be out during the day. So they're not going to be on the boat as much. So they don't really schedule as many cool activities on a port day. So for example, on a port day, you got the crew emergency drill. That's always fun. If you weren't out of bed by 10 a.m. on a port day, you were going to be out of bed by 10 a.m. because when they do crew emergency drills, they really sound those horrible, horrible sirens that make you wish for death because your ears feel like they're bleeding. So yeah, 10 a.m. on a port day, they will do a crew emergency drill. You will be drilled out of bed, even because we were one morning. They'll have a solo traveler's coffee chat on a port day. They do trivia every day. It's team trivia, so it's good fun. It's not hyper competitive. It's not like, Jeopardy or something like that. It's much more casual than that. They'll show some movies in the theater. And then before you know it, you're actually at afternoon tea. So even on port days, they serve afternoon tea in the Queen's Room or in the grills if you are at that level of restaurant and service. So, they don't have much going on board on a port day during the day, but then in the evening on a port day, they've got social croquet. Then they've got a variety of live music all over the ship, easy listening jazz. They've got a guitarist playing. They've got a pianist playing in the Queen's Room, which is the ballroom. They've got recorded ballroom music that's kind of just playing. So if you want to go dance at that time, you can. And then they'll have theater shows, of course. That's a big part of most cruise experiences are theater shows. And they tend to be like musical song and dance kind of things often. Sometimes it might be a comedian. Sometimes it might be a variety act. It varies from day to day. So the port day is not as exciting as the import day, or the not import, the sea day. The sea day means you're out to ocean floating around. And a lot of people have asked me, well, aren't sea days boring? No, they're really not. Our sea days flew by because we were so busy doing so many things. So this was actually the daily program from the Roaring Twenties evening, which I have the thing for that here somewhere, I think. Yes. So for Roaring Twenties evening, we received this on our bed. And the mirror effect, that actually says Roaring Twenties. It doesn't say Roaring 50s. So on the Roaring Twenties evening, they actually had a performance of Top Hat in the Royal Theatre. And then in the ballroom, in the Queen's Room, they had a big band. So they took the ballroom, the typical ballroom dance, the ballroom orchestra, the Queen's Room Orchestra, and the theater, the Royal Theatre Orchestra, and they combined them. And they actually, it's like I don't know, 15, 16, 17 piece big band. It's a big band. Unfortunately, even though it was Roaring Twenties evening, they didn't actually play any music arranged in a 1920s style, which was really sad. And I commented on that to the entertainment director, and she looked at me, she said, they didn't? I said, no, they didn't even play the Charleston on Roaring Twenties evening. That's kind of a key Roaring Twenties thing. You should at least play the Charleston if you're not going to play anything else from the era. And then, of course, Top Hat is actually based on Irving Berlin's music. And it's a really great, I've heard of it. I've seen excerpts from it. I really wanted to see it. But they put it right against big band, which is our thing, like big band, Lindy Hop, Charleston, Balboa. That's our thing. So I wasn't going to miss an entire set of big band that they only do once for a viewing of Top Hat. I expressed the idea that maybe they should have put Top Hat on an evening when they didn't have big band music in the Queen's Room. Like maybe they shouldn't have put those against each other. Anyway, other activities they have then on a sea day. They actually have a card room, a big card room with lots of card tables, and it is full of people. They have bridge lessons. So if you ever wondered what your grandmother was talking about when she was talking about bridge, you can learn it on Cunard's cruises, actually. And all of our table mates, except for us, they all did bridge every day. It seemed very competitive, actually.
They seemed vicious.
They seemed vicious. They seemed a little vicious about it, in fact. I think the trivia was probably a more friendly experience. So they have card games. Specifically, you can learn things like bridge. Then they have lots of physically active activities that can help you stay in shape. So they have line dancing in the morning. Then they have ballroom dance lessons. So even if you don't know how to dance going into the cruise, every day, every sea day, there's a different kind of ballroom dance you can learn. Cha-cha, rumba, waltz, tango, foxtrot. These are the ballroom forms of those dances, not the vintage form, and not it's not Argentine tango, it's ballroom tango. Yeah, I know. There's some snobbery in my voice. You heard it. So there's ballroom dance lessons, there's watercolor classes, and you don't have to provide any materials, $35. You get a kit that you can use for the rest of the cruise. And every sea day, there's watercolor painting classes, which is really nice. Of course, morning team trivia. They have enrichment speakers on sea days. So our enrichment speakers included a specialist in the history of 20th century music. We actually had a volcanologist, a geologist on board who was lecturing about the geology and the volcanology of the places we were visiting. And that was pretty interesting. So they've got these enrichment speakers. They lecture twice a day each. So If you want to just go and expand your horizons, plenty of opportunity to do that. They have Zumba. I did Zumba every day. So another great way to stay in shape. This is going to sound boring, but it's actually interesting. At noon, they do a navigational announcement. And that, I know that sounds ridiculous, but the captain actually comes on and he tells us where we are in the ocean and where we're headed and where we've been. And then he provides this day in history about whatever the date is. And he provides several different facts from across the world and across history. So it's usually really interesting. And sometimes it's sad and depressing if it's the wrong day. Yeah, like if you happen to be cruising when the Titanic sank, that's just sad. That's a sad day in history.
Yeah, they always announce it when you go over the spot.
Oh yeah, and if you do an Atlantic crossing, you will basically cross over the graveyard of the Titanic, and they will make an announcement about it. It's a pretty solemn moment. I actually kind of recommend everyone go through it once. It puts life in perspective a little bit. Yeah. Okay, back to less serious things. They also offer chair aerobics every day, which is a very low impact form of aerobics where you do it mostly seated. So it's definitely aimed at a certain bracket of people or people with certain mobility limitations. Then there's more trivia and there's movies. They have a hobby corner. So it's where you bring your own handcraft projects and you just sit and you gab with fellow creative people. I actually brought lots of handcraft projects and I never once made it to the hobby corner because we were so busy trying to remember all the dances we hadn't done for 2.5 years. So we were practicing in every corner of the ship that we could find. So more watercolor class, of course, the bridge tournament. They probably had to clean blood up there every day, I'm assuming. There's actually a lawn on the Queen Elizabeth up on the top on the 12th deck, one part of the 12th deck, and you can go and play bowls or bocce, as we call it in the US. That's a tournament too. I wonder if that resulted in blood. Never actually got to go up and see. And of course, there's plenty of gambling opportunities. There's a casino on board. There's roulette. They have bingo every day. Bingo was always very, very well attended. People really like gambling. What can I say? There's cocktail classes, but those, of course, come with a fee because you get to drink the fruits of your labor. Afternoon tea. That is, for those who are familiar with the Cunard experience, of course, you're familiar with afternoon tea. If you're not and you're watching this, afternoon tea is an institution on Cunard ships. So all the queens have afternoon tea in the queen's room and in the grills if you're dining at that level. They also serve tea on the Lido deck in the buffet area. So you can choose your level of engagement and or formality for afternoon tea. But with afternoon tea, they have waiters with white gloves who come around and serve you a delightful tea blend. And they have a variety of sandwiches, usually 4 different kinds from which to choose, and a variety of pastries and freshly baked scones and clotted cream and beautifully laid tables. And they have some sort of musical accompaniment. So afternoon tea is a great experience. And sometimes they do a tea dance. They did one tea dance on this voyage. It used to be they did one every 7 days, but they sort of seem to have forgotten about it until some fellow dancers begged them to do a tea dance. That was great. Really love the tea dances. So you have afternoon tea. So, if you do it right, you can do nothing but eat all day. Or if you do it wrong, I guess, you can do nothing but eat all day. Planning on doing a video on how not to gain weight on these voyages. It seems to be needful. So then there's more. Afternoon also has enrichment speakers. They also have a lot of, they call them enrichment speakers, but it's really just sort of designed to get you to buy something. So, like to this afternoon's discussion was the African Queen of Gems, and it was Tanzanite. And so, learn more about the majestic part of the world where Tanzanite is found in mind. And of course, part of the idea is to get you intrigued by the thing they're talking about and then have you go and buy it from the shop. They have a jeweler on board, or a jewelry shop on board. Whether there's actually a jeweler there or not, I doubt. There's also, of course, paddle tennis is a big thing. And again, I kind of believe there was blood all over the deck because we passed through that a couple of times and it definitely seemed very competitive. Yeah. There are gatherings for a variety of groups. There's Masonic group gatherings, there's LGBTQ plus gatherings, there's singles gatherings, and they'll also be on the schedule. There's also Catholic Mass nearly every day, and there's a Jewish service usually every Friday. So I haven't actually seen a Muslim service offered, Islamic service offered, but they do offer a variety of religious clerical services for people of various faiths. I've also seen Anglican, of course, too. It is a British ship, after all. Yeah, and then in the evening, there is live music all over the ship. There's the strings playing in various places, and it used to be a string quartet, but now it's a string trio, which is kind of sad. There was no harp on this cruise. I was very sad that there was no harpist. Instead, there was a guitarist, and it was not the kind of guitar I really like just listening to in that atmosphere. If it had been a classical Spanish guitar, I would have loved it, but it was more like an electric guitar. Not really not the right vibe for the Queen Elizabeth. And, then there's also ballroom dancing used to be every evening, not so much every evening, but many evenings to the live dance orchestra. And then there is the yacht club, which is a nightclub sort of thing. And they're still doing, typical DJ music up there for people. And it's, it's loud and you can't hear each other. And it's got that whole nightclub vibe to it. So if that's what you want to do, you can absolutely go do that. Okay, well, I believe that is all the questions I had delivered. Oh, someone asked about medical. What's the situation with medical on board? Most cruise ships have a relatively well-equipped set of medical facilities in the bowels of the boat. And they're designed specifically to be able to respond to the sort of emergencies that tend to happen to guests in the age bracket that is typical for that boat. So they can provide a lot of resuscitative services and first aid and emergency medical care. But if the situation is something that's too serious, then the ship will make its way to whatever the nearest habited landmass is, and the passenger, the ill passenger, will be medevaced. And that happened to us. In fact, on our way back from Cádiz, sailing up towards the Bay of Biscay, one of our passengers sadly suffered a medical emergency, and we actually went alongside in A Coruña in Spain, and they medevaced him off the ship at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And I haven't heard any news of him. I'm really hoping that it was in a timely fashion to help him. It actually set us back quite a few hours, so we ended up pulling into port about 8 hours later in Southampton than we were supposed to. So everyone got extra time on the boat. Well, that was happy, but I'm really sad that it was for the reason for which it was. Point is that if there is a medical emergency, they can render effective service long enough to get proper, if it's necessary, full service medical evacuation to an actual proper clinic somewhere. And currently they also do COVID testing on board, PCR testing, in fact, and they offer it for a very reasonable price. On our last ship, antigen tests were on our last voyage 2 weeks ago. Antigen tests were $25. PCR tests were $35. They're never $35. PCR tests, I've paid so much money on PCR tests these last couple of years. So I actually thought that was a really good value for money. However, you should make sure that if you go on a cruise that you have insurance, medical insurance that will cover treatment abroad. Now, if you come from certain EU countries or most EU countries, that will automatically be the case. But, if you're from the United States, it probably won't automatically be the case. And actually, I learned something interesting but completely sensible once I heard it. So when Brits are actually required, I think by law, to have, because of the NHS, they're actually required to have medical insurance that covers them abroad when they go on a cruise, for instance. Well, it's apparently extremely cheap unless your travel is taking you to the US. The second your travel is taking you to the US, it dodecatuples. I mean, it really 10 to 12 times more expensive if you're receiving treatment in the US, because the costs are so absolutely ridiculously exorbitant for medical care in the United States. So I thought that was interesting and a sad commentary about the state of the healthcare system in the United States. Anyway, off the soapbox. Medical care in port, a lot of, especially depending on the country you're in, a lot of EU countries have pharmacies where you can actually purchase over the counter a lot of drugs you wouldn't be able to purchase over the counter in the United States, but over the counter meaning you have to go to the pharmacist, explain to the pharmacist your situation, and then they will sell you the drugs. You can't just go pick them up off the shelf. This also means, my fellow Americans, if you are traveling abroad, take bottles of Tylenol and ibuprofen with you, because we get it for so ridiculously cheaply OTC in the US, whereas, say, in Germany, a pack of 12 tablets of paracetamol, which is Tylenol, is like €3 for 12. So my travel tip to my fellow inhabitants of the United States of America: bring your own Tylenol and ibuprofen with you. Just do it. But for many things for which you would need a prescription in the United States, you don't need in other countries. So if you're feeling ill, the pharmacist is actually where I recommend you go. If it's just sort of, you have a headache or maybe a light cough or something and you're in a port, go to the pharmacist, tell them your symptoms, and they'll recommend something and you can get it there rather than bothering with a doctor and a prescription. Okay, so that was, and also if you're American and you don't know this, just out-of-pocket medical expenses are way less expensive in every other country in the world than the United States, hands down, every other country. I'm not exaggerating. So even if your insurance doesn't cover medical treatment in another country, it's possible that you just paying for it will be cheaper than a copay would be for you. Sorry, we have an awful healthcare system. Okay, I think those are all the questions that people gave to me in advance. Are there any questions from anyone who happens to be awake and still watching? It's actually, for me, it's 11:47 p.m. I'm in Korea, so I'm in the future for some of you, depending on where you are. Yeah. Any other questions? Because otherwise I've been holding forth for like 47 minutes, pretty much nonstop. I'm kind of amazed. Hopefully it was interesting and people will watch it and think, oh, I got good information, instead of, wow, that lady just needs to shut up. Okay, well, there being no questions then, I thank you all for joining me for this travel Q&A. I will do more travel Q&As on other focus areas, maybe even just a general travel Q&A. And on my Creative Contessa channel, I'm going to be setting up some Q&As about various creative topics there as well for people who are into the creative side of things. Otherwise, stay tuned on Travels with the Contessa. We have a lot more, we took so much footage. We have so much content to create. I just finished putting together a review of Afternoon Tea. Oh, thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate that. Well, I'm glad it's okay. I kind of figured that's what it was supposed to be. Is your auto correct set to Italian? Anyway, I thank you all for joining me. We've got lots of content rolling out. Pretty soon I'm going to be launching a thing on the Afternoon Tea and the Princess Grill, and we've got some port days to it where we go and explore things and learn things and pet strange kitties that have fleas. Yes, that really happened to me on my white clubs. So thank you all for your support and for joining me. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, and or evening. And don't forget to travel creative. Oh yeah, me too. Actually, I've just started learning Italian as well. So I totally feel you on that. It's a great language. Okay, well then, thank you for joining me, Thomas. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see each other in the space later on. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.